The NFL draft has wrapped up. The Saints were pretty aggressive on the final day, which was a little bit surprising. We're going to get into that, as well as the 11 undrafted free agents. Where do the Saints sit right now, and what do they need to do? We're going to address it all on this episode of NewOrleans.Football, presented by PJ's Coffee.
Brooks here, Mike's here. It's going to be a great show. So excited to have you joining the team, and also really, really excited to have PJ's Coffee as a sponsor of the show now, the new presenting sponsor. It's always awesome when the products you actually use want to mess with you. So they're messing with us. I'm drinking there every day, the iced vanilla latte, my favorite drink to have in the whole world. And we are also coming to you from the Better Call BADEAUX podcast studio. So if you need legal help with any of the following: 18-wheeler collisions, car wrecks, offshore injuries, Maritime Jones Act, hurricane and storm claims, you better call BADEAUX at 504-323-7777 or 985-303-7777 for your free consultation and case review. And make sure you go check out Ideal Market. They are a new sponsor of the show as well. They have a sponsored segment every week. They love the Saints. We love their food. The rotisserie chicken is to die for. Go out there, check it out, get one of their hot plates, and tell them we sent you their way. It can always help. So support them because they support us. And of course, Hardhide Ponchatoula Strawberry Whiskey. They got on with us early on. They're still with us. Hardhide is an 86 proof blend of aged wheat bourbon, American light whiskey, and fresh Ponchatoula strawberries. Blended in New Orleans, it is not for the thin-skinned. Look for it in your favorite stores, bars, and restaurants. And while you're out and about, check out our friends on Veterans Boulevard, Firehouse Subs. Great people doing great stuff for the community. They have some locations coming soon on the North Shore, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's get into the show. All right, another edition of the NewOrleans.Football show. We have Brooke Kirchhofer here hosting our show now. We are so excited to have you as part of the team. This is a very, very exciting moment. Feels like phase 3 of NewOrleans.Football. Phase 1 was the little weak website I started in my apartment. Phase 2 is Mike, and now we're here.
I'm a phase?
You're a phase.
Wow.
We're each a phase.
Yeah.
Hey,
Phases
well,
are gross,
I'm happy
man.
to be a part of this team and to be a phase. And coming in at a perfect time. NFL draft wraps up. The Saints, a little different this year. They wait to move up until the final day, which has been a little bit interesting. But let's get right into the first round. What was your guys' impression of how they handled the first round pick?
I mean, we always say, we try to caution everyone all the time when we talk in the pre-draft. You can't just, everybody does their mock draft and they pick, oh, what's the biggest need? I'll give that to him in the first round. What's the second biggest need? I'll give that to him in the second round. What's their third biggest need? That's exactly how the Saints handle this draft. And we know from their history that they don't just do it that way. They truly take their best available players. So in that, I mean, my impression is the draft must have fallen pretty perfectly. They needed a 3-technique defensive tackle, and they found one they liked in round 1. They needed a defensive end. They found one they liked in round 2. They needed a running back. They found one they liked in round 3, where Nick and I both said there's great value to be had at running back. And, you know, everything else is gravy. I mean, the quarterbacks can be interesting. I know we'll talk about later. But, you know, I saw a lot of people give them B- and stuff, probably because they didn't pick until 29th. But it's hard to argue with where need met value and what opportunities presented themselves in this draft.
And it was the guy that they wanted. They didn't have to go up to get Brian Brzee, which was a little bit surprising. We do know his injury history, but for him to fall all the way to 29, was that surprising to you? They also get Isaiah Foskey at 40, Kendre Miller at 71. Didn't have to move up to get any of those guys. Do you think those were all valued at their spots?
Yeah, I think they kind of played the board pretty well. And Brzee falling to them at 29. When me and Mike were doing our mock drafts, we were kind of looking at 24 is that point, because we thought Jacksonville might be the team to take him. So for him to still be there, I thought was a pretty decent outcome. Now, going to the B- thing, if you're looking at the draft as like a 2-year window and you see, oh, the Eagles got Jalen Carter at 9, basically with the Saints pick, they moved up one spot. I can see maybe that. But overall, I think this was a good draft for them. And it's almost freaky that they did go down that list and hit every single need. It never happens like that. Nothing happened to where you're like, what's going on? This is really, really weird. All the players they picked, you go look at their stats page, they have actual stats. Like normally it's like, who is this guy? Can he play in the NFL? So I like the stuff they did, but what we feel now and what we feel a year from now probably isn't going to be aligned. But coming out of it, I like what they got done.
What will even feel 6 to 7 months from now? We've seen these rookie defensive ends hit or miss for the Saints, right? Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport. The hope is that Brazil can come in and produce for a few years, right? First round pick at 29. So what is the ideal situation for Bryan Bresee in round 1, presented by Ideal Market, guys?
Yeah, look, it's crazy because you look at defensive tackles in the league and they don't produce earlier in their careers. Me and Mike were just talking about this before the show. Like, they don't have stats early on in their NFL careers. Jordan Davis last year, no sacks. Wyatt last year, 1.5 sacks. If you get 6 sacks as a defensive tackle, you are a top 13, 12 player in the league. So I think for Bresee, if he comes into this season, if he had 5 sacks and 40 pressures, that's a borderline Pro Bowl season. So anything in that range, and I think he's going to have a lot of opportunities. They're going to use him on a lot of stunts. Teams like to slide over towards Cam Jordan. So I think there's going to be opportunity for him to get some cleanup sacks there, some cheap plays, some on-block pressures. But if he gets 3-4 sacks, I think it would be a huge win for them.
So this is the synergy that you've joined, Brooke. Nick and I didn't talk exactly about this, but he looked up, like last year's rookies, I looked up Cedric Ellis and Sheldon Rankins, the guys who were at the Saints, and then the top 3 techniques in the league: Quinnen Williams, everybody but Aaron Donald, he's a unicorn, but like Quinnen Williams and Jeffrey Simmons and Chris Jones, none of them came out, like they all got slow starts to their career. It's a position where you can expect a slow start, at least from production numbers. But the thing that we like so much about him is we were just looking at how paper thin the defensive line was, and how they just need bodies, because the Saints rotate. Even if he's giving you 35, 40 snaps a game, now you feel a lot better about Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, the 2 veterans that they signed, and there will actually be a rotation there. And we could probably meld Isaiah Foskey into that. He'll rotate in with Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson and Tano Passignon and Peyton Turner. They needed 2 more guys to fill out that rotation. Right. So more than will Bresee get 5 sacks, will Bresee get attention? We used to joke about in Sheldon Rankins' best years, they called him Chris Paul. It helped everyone. If that defensive line, which became the biggest worry point on the team, goes back to being a strength based on depth and volume, he is a successful rookie pick.
And the Saints are always going to be optimistic, right? I think going into the draft, they had picked up some guys in free agencies, but whether they say it or not, they did not have a true starting defensive tackle on the roster. You now potentially do with Bryan Bresee. We'll see how things shake out. And I think it's important to remind some of the Saints fans and NFL fans, injuries happen. It is going to happen. I know a lot of people weren't happy with the pick based on the knee injury and the shoulder injury. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, the shoulder injury wasn't that pressing. And when it comes to knee injuries, it's been some time since he's been able to recover from that. And he should come in ready to go and explode in a new defense. And I think under Dennis Allen, it's going to be interesting this year too, with some of the new coaching changes and sticking with the defense. We've seen the Saints kind of do this in the first round. Why did they pass on edge Nolan Smith from Georgia? I think it was meant to be that he went to the Eagles. That's become the landing spot for the Georgia Bulldogs.
That's the worst thing. That was the worst part of the pick, is not only did the Saints pass on him, but then the nemesis Eagles swooped right in, like, those idiots passed on him. We'll take him.
Yep, they get Jalen Carter, the #1 D tackle, and then go and get Nolan Smith. Would you have been upset if they went and took Nolan Smith instead of Bryan Bresee? Would that have been a better pick?
I wouldn't have been upset. I would have been surprised. The very first mock draft me and Nick did, Nolan Smith was available. And we were like, what should we do? We had a long talk about it. And they go, well, let's write about it. Let's make it the topic of our... And one of the things I wrote was, well, we passed on him. And I go, I don't feel disingenuous passing on him because he probably won't be there anyway in real life. But there he was, and they did pass on him. Now, the whole league pretty much passed on him as well because he fits a very specific role, which is probably 3-4 outside linebacker. If the Saints would have drafted him, the guy weighed 238 pounds at the combine. The Saints could draft a player like that and make use for him. Of course, they're supposed to. That's what a good team should do. But their use for him would have probably been to move him to off-ball linebacker, like they did with Zach Bond, like they did with Caden Ellis. And if he's an off-ball linebacker here, he's probably not a first-round pick. So, yeah, he might thrive with the Eagles, and for years people be like, I can't believe they passed on him. But Dennis Allen has said it a million times. It's a big man's game. It's a philosophy the front office believes in, the coaching staff believes in. He's not an edge rusher for the Saints.
Mm-hmm.
If they were a more complete team, I think it would make sense to go out and get someone like that and you drop them in and you find use of them. But they need a lot of help on this defense. They aren't one guy away. It isn't, we can take a chance on this. So when we did that mock draft, I like asked around what people thought where he would fit. And he's a 3-4 linebacker. And they were saying, hey, he actually might fall because there's like 2 teams in the league that he's going to fit perfectly on. I reached out to someone with the Saints to get their actual prototypes on this position, right defensive end, that jack position. They go a little bit smaller there than the opposite one. So here's the numbers. Prototype, 6'4", 268 pounds, 4.71 speed. The minimum requirement, 6'2", 252 pounds, 4.78 40 speed. Nolan Smith is 6'2", 238 pounds, extremely fast, 4.39 40. He is smaller than Pete Werner, who was 6'2", 242 pounds at the combine. And when we went out to our first practice, we're sitting there looking at Pete Werner and we're like, is he a safety? Like, he looks small at linebacker next to Demario Davis. This guy's smaller than him on the edge. Just the way they play, it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. I think he is going to be a good player. I think he'll be great in Philly. They used Hassan Reddick really well, but I just don't think that he had a spot here.
So why does size matter for defensive line linebackers, but it doesn't matter for quarterbacks? Cam Jordan tweeted something the other day saying, now I see who we draft. I don't know if that was a knock or not on the Saints drafting quarterbacks similar to Drew Brees' side. Of course, there is only one Drew Brees. They went after a quarterback. They moved up to get him, Jake Haener from Fresno State. What interests me about all of this is it was threefold that made sense why he came to the Saints, or why I think the Saints could make sense of it. He already's worked with Drew Brees and has looked at 2019 tape. He told us that. He worked with him back in January, February, kind of already working on his mechanics as an NFL quarterback. The mentorship with Derek Carr, that is already in place, and it can continue in training camp. I don't think he was ever meant to come in and start right away or even compete. He might not compete for that starting job for the next 3 years, depending on how this works with Derek Carr. And then, of course, working with Ronald Curry, he's already in the playbook at the Senior Bowl. So in the Saints' eyes, I can see why those 3 things make sense. You don't tell me that before they move up and draft this kid. I'm thinking, who is Jake Haener, right?
Yeah.
No, it's funny that you use the size transition too, because I remember Sean Payton saying more than once, quote, it's the one position on our league where they come in all shapes and sizes, which is very funny. It is the one position where they will kind of throw out prototype, and it's more about production. But yeah, I mean, look, the team that thrived with Drew Brees for all those years in the same offense should understand better than anyone that it's about processing, it's about making the right reads, the quick decisions, the way you see the field, and all those things are big pluses for Jake Haener. But if he was 6'3" and did all those things, he probably would have been a first-round pick instead of a late fourth-round pick. So that is still a stigma that needs to be overcome. But yeah, that's not what they're asking out of him here. So even though they took him, I should know this, I think later than Ian Book was taken, pretty close. But I'm a little more optimistic about this than I was with
Ian
Grayson
Book was
either.
a few picks later.
He kind of fits the same thing that Nick was saying about Brian Brzee has actual stats. Isaiah Foskey has actual stats. Kendry Miller has actual stats. This guy has actual real college production. I mean, he was being talked about as a Heisman candidate in college, or early in each of his last 2 seasons. So I'm optimistic that this can be one that hits. But no, I'm not expecting him to compete for a starting job anytime soon.
I low-key kind of like the pick, and I haven't done like the deep dive on him yet, but the stuff that I have seen of him, he's like a really good rhythm passer, and that's something that you can't teach. I think that makes him different than Ian Book, and it does kind of make him a little bit Brees-like. I'm afraid to say that, but like, I'm not saying he's Drew Brees, but that's an element of his game at that size that you want someone to have. And they do seem to think that they have maybe like this thing in the 4th round, mid rounds, where you can get an undersized guy and maybe hit lightning there because they are undervalued by the league, because they are all looking at prototype. So this is a spot where, like, if we're talking about, if you're going to take Nolan Smith, you're going to make an exception. It's much more likely in the middle rounds than it is in the very early rounds. But is a person that, my personal philosophy on quarterbacks is pull the ticket every couple of years, take a chance, take a gamble. If you get it right, great. If you don't, Ian Book's gone. What was really the cost of that? Rick Leonard? Like, you didn't get another Rick Leonard. Like, I think you're okay with that outcome. So I liked it. I like taking chances. I think you need to take chances, and we'll see what he does. And look, if he becomes just a backup and that's it, you're saving money on your backup. You aren't paying Jameis Winston $4 million or whatever it is. You're paying $935,000.
And even if you don't subscribe to the theory that you should do it every year, they were up in their rotation to have one now. After Ian Book got claimed off waivers, they usually always have some young developmental guy in the system, even if it's some undrafted guy that they picked up. And there was an opening for a young developmental guy behind Carr and Winston here.
Yeah, and just to compare the two, Ian Book was selected 133, Jake Haener 127. So not much of a difference. So close, so close. But if you miss on him, it's not the end of the world, right? Because you have arguably one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL with Jameis Winston sitting behind Derek Carr. So you both are comfortable with that pick then.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Yeah, no, I'm Mr. Take a quarterback unless it's Hendon Hooker at 29. So that was me and Mike's biggest debate ever on this podcast. We could have used you here to moderate that one. There is a lost episode of an hour-long debate over the Hendon Hooker.
We keep promising that to people. There's going to be an all 22 deal, a Christmas. But the Sports Illustrated used to give the phone.
No, this one's staying in the vault. It was bad. Right. It was bad. Where did he get drafted third round? Just such a fruitless debate overall.
All right, let's move off of quarterback. Get into this tight end Adam Trautman trade. Very surprising that Sean Payton is still somebody we're talking about. When is this cloud of Sean Payton going to loom over to Denver and get away from the Saints? But here's what this trade looked like. So the Saints send Adam Trautman and a 7th round pick to Denver. In return, they moved up to pick 195 and got A.T. Perry. Adam Trautman also came out with this quote, courtesy of one of the stations in Denver, I believe it was 9 News, saying, "They put a limit on what I could contribute, and I felt like I could contribute a lot more. I was primarily used as a blocker. I thought I could do more, and I did not want to get to the end of my career and think I could have done it, caught the ball a little more." 2 things. I think Troutman had plenty of opportunities to prove he could be tight end 1, and he missed on that when Jerwan Johnson took advantage last year. And 2, Saints have never been shy about wanting their tight ends to be involved in the run game as well and blocking. That's something we hear in training camp day 1, day 2, day 3 of any tight ends that enter that room. So is it fair that Troutman made that statement?
I think it's a little weird. You had an opportunity to be the guy. You had the runway there. You let a former wide receiver come in and take your job. You let a former quarterback come in and take snaps from you. You had opportunities to catch the ball and didn't really take advantage of it the way you should have. In 2020, he almost had a 50-50 split of run snaps versus pass snaps. Last year, it dropped a lot. It was 519 snaps, 144 of those were route running snaps. So he had his opportunities. I just don't think he capitalized. And I think in 21, he kind of proved to be a little bit unreliable and inconsistent. A couple drops. He had a real bad fumble that one play. There was a lot of stuff with his concentration, and he was open about that he wasn't watching the ball come in before he tried to do stuff, and he just didn't have his mind in the right place. I think he has all the potential in the world. If he went somewhere and it suddenly clicked at some point, it wouldn't shock me. But I don't know that he was at a point where it was like he was owed anything. Right. He had the chances and just didn't capitalize.
Yeah, I don't blame him for his opinion, and I don't necessarily read those comments as accusatory. There were facts. There was a stretch in 2021, a 4-game stretch where he averaged 7 targets a game. It was 9-8, 7-6 or whatever, and then he got hurt. And then last year, I don't think there was ever more than 3 targets in a game. He did have an opportunity, and if you remember that 2021 season, they were begging anyone to please catch a pass on the team. They needed it desperately. They needed it desperately this past season. They went into this offseason saying we need a contested catch receiver. But they also went into this offseason saying, I think we can upgrade at tight end. I think we can upgrade receiving tight end, blocking tight end, everything. So he was falling out of favor here. His opportunities were shrinking, not growing here. You can say it's his own fault because he didn't capitalize on opportunities earlier. But he's right. A change of scenery is probably what he needed. So good for him. Maybe that's what finally makes it click. But he was right about the fact that his role was growing and their viewpoint on him. I don't think he was going to see a second contract here. That's for sure.
I think the offense might change a little bit now too. They badly need another tight end, but I think this might be a symbol that they're going to change a little bit of their offensive identity In 2019, they played 11 snaps with 3 receivers on the field. 12% of their snaps, 2 tight ends on the field. Last year, 50%, just 3 receivers, 27.7, 2 tight ends on the field. Some of that's Taysom Hill, but Pete Carmichael too, the one season he ran the Saints, it was the most 3 receiver personnel they ever used. I think getting a quarterback that you trust and you spread it out a little bit, it just might not be as tight end dependent, but I still do think they need one more.
Well, it's interesting too. They signed another big receiver in Brian Edwards in free agency, and then what they did with the draft pick, another big receiver in A.T. Perry. Although I don't think they're done at tight end. I mean, we know they're interested in Foster Moreau, who could step right in and be everything that Adam Trautman was for this team, if healthy enough to play, which is a big if this year. And if Foster Moreau's not going to be available to them to play this year, I bet you they bring in another veteran.
Cameron Brate, Dan Arnold, who are you going?
Exactly.
Probably not Dan Arnold, because I think whoever comes in will probably have to be blocker first, pass catcher second.
Yeah. And so we'll see what happens at that position, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we touch on some of the undrafted free agents they went out and got. But sticking with the offense, wide receiver A.T. Perry fell to round 6, was incredibly surprising for a lot of analysts that cover him at the ACC network. To quote one of the analysts that are there, saying he's one of our sleepers. He's legit. Big play threat, big guy, massive wingspan, will gain muscle and weight for strength. But so many times I've seen him make insane contested catches, which have been an issue for Saints wide receivers this year. That is a big key right there, that he has made contested catches. Also, they said it's just incredibly weird that he fell as far as he did because, and he mentioned this to us in his interview, that there was a character flaw. Obviously, the Saints wouldn't have drafted him if they felt that there was a character flaw. They're very particular, as we know, about their locker room. So is it a steal with A.T. Perry?
I think it is. I mean, we were looking at him in some of our mock drafts in the mid rounds, and he was there, and he kind of seems to fit what they need. As Mike said, they need bigger bodied guys. That he's one of them. You mentioned the contested catches. Huge thing they needed last year. Mike Thomas had like 20, and then nobody else had more than 12, I think, the whole entire season. And Mike played 3 games. So it's something that they badly need to add to their offense overall. And I like him. I mean, man, the numbers. Again, you look at it, 1,000 yards the last few years, 1,200 the year before. The only knock on him is he's had 17 drops the last 2 seasons. So that's got to get cleaned up a little bit. But I don't think that's enough to drop you in the draft. He has everything else you need. Derek Carr throws a very catchable ball, so maybe that helps with some of that too. I like the pick. We're going to get to a segment later. He's my favorite pick in the draft. I feel like they stole him, and I think he has a lot of upside.
My only cold water that I'll pour on that is when I read everything about A.T. Perry, I was like, because we know they wanted a big receiver and a contested catch guy. And I was like, 6'3", whatever he was, 213 pounds or something like that, with double-digit touchdowns each. I go, this has got to be the guy. But then when I watch a tape, those contested catches are sort of like Marquez Callaway contested catches, like throw it up down the field, and he high points the ball really well. He is not a work-in traffic guy. That's something he's going to have to develop in his game. He's paper like he's 6'3", but it looks like a stiff breeze could knock him over, which more power to him. But working in traffic, being that third down, being that red zone guy, those are parts of his game he'll have to develop for sure.
Man, if they can get someone that can outleap a little bit, though, to replace that Callaway, it's something that they can use in the red zone. So there's at least a spot where he's usable right away, I think. I like it. I like
People
to pick a lot of upside. Yeah,
love him in training camp. The guy who has always stood out most in training camp is always the big receiver when they are not wearing pads and they're not getting physical with each other, and he just gets to pick the defense apart. He is going to be the wow OTA guy and the wow mini camp before they put the pads on guy.
Last point, he's pissed off too, and I like that he's pissed off. He's coming in with something to prove.
Well, and the guys that have flashed in training camp haven't necessarily flashed in the regular season, so maybe he can be the first to put 2 and 2 together, impress the Saints fans out there in Metairie, and then
win
impress
August and win
in the Superdome. Let's get into that then. What is your favorite pick? Let's start with draft picks, then we'll get to the undrafted free agents. Mike, what do you like most about this? I'm
going to be very uncreative here, and I'm going to say Brian Brzee. I mean, it was. I did a thing before free agency started where I listed the biggest needs on this team. And I listed 3 technique defensive tackle as the biggest need on the team. And they still had David Onyemata at the time and were talking about the possibility of re-signing him. And it still would have been my number 1 need on this team. Then they let David Onyemata go. They don't necessarily replace him with a surefire 3 technique in free agency. Maybe Nathan Shepard will start in that role. Maybe Colin Saunders can play both of them. But the need was so great. We liked Brzee from the very beginning of the draft process, wondered if he would be in their range, wondered if they'd have to trade up to get him. The only thing I didn't like is there was like only 1 or 2 3 techniques. So hard to count on that. It all felt like, I mean, it's exactly what they needed. I'm going to take the chalk pick here.
Yeah. And you kind of already showed your hand. A.T. Perry is your guy.
Yeah.
Outside of the things we've already talked about, personality might be in question, contested catches. Is there something about him that fans need to know about ahead of training camp?
I like the fit, and I just like that. But look, I'll show my second card here. I guess since we kind of breezed over Foskey, I like the Foskey pick a lot too. I know they were looking at some other positions going into the second round, but that kind of ended up where they needed to go. And they got a guy, they checked another box. I think that he has a lot of development to do, but the thing I like about him, extremely athletic. They get burned by the Jalen Hurts types quarterbacks all the time. Dennis Allen mentioned that he should be able to help with that, be able to chase them down. He has a lot of production. Again, all-time leading sack getter at Notre Dame, 22 sacks over the last 2 years. Not a projection, not a Houston guy that like you're trying to project what he's going to be. He's not coming from a tiny school like Marcus Davenport. Big school, real production. He should be able to come in and be able to play.
I like the pick, Nick Saldiveri, especially given the offensive line injuries. I'll never forget covering the Pittsburgh Steelers game and looking with binoculars. Who's starting at center? What was Josh Andrews? And the amount of injuries the offensive line continues to have at the worst times every single year. He's somebody who has played up and down the offensive line. I know it's Old Dominion, but the fact that he was able to pick up such a large prospect grade too from a lot of these scouts. A lot of people like him. The Saints obviously did. He played primarily right tackle. They are obviously going to bring him in, and Dennis Allen has already said they want him to play inside. He has several games at right guard, and his first snaps at center were in the Senior Bowl, and apparently he looked so good that some teams were considering him center/guard. So if that were to happen this year, let's say, God forbid, Eric McCoy goes down again, you can either slide Cesar Ruiz over if you're more comfortable with him as the backup center and plug Nick Saldiveri right in.
Yeah, look, I talked to 2 scouts after they made that trade up with different teams. Said, hey, did they need to do this? Was this a reach? He was the top interior player on both those teams' boards, so it did seem like the Saints absolutely had to do that to get him.
The other thing I noted in our notes, they mentioned they felt like a run was coming on offensive linemen, and that's why they traded up. And 10 offensive linemen went in the first 20 picks of the day, so they were exactly right about that. That happened at running back when they took Kendry Miller. It happened at quarterback when they took Jake Haener. We are glossing past Kendry Miller.
Yes.
The only thing I need to say is if anybody's been listening for the last month and reading everything, me and Nick have been basically telling the Saints, you have to pick a running back in the middle rounds or else, and they did it. So we should tell them, okay, you did what you were supposed to.
He's the lead topic on our Wednesday show, so we're definitely going to get into Kendrick Miller and the running backs.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that, and also some questionable comments he's made ahead of training camp. Already some competition there. Let's get to the undrafted free agents. You might go ahead first. Who do you like the best?
Well, the thing I look at undrafted free agents is who's filling the gaps sometimes. So you brought that up a minute ago when we were talking about tight end. I bet all the undrafted tight ends were telling their agent, get me to New Orleans. You know, not only did they not get the tight end we said they needed, they got rid of one during the draft. So that has a great chance. But linebacker's the other position. Linebacker was a need position that they didn't draft. So, Anthony Orji, who they paid a lot of money to, Nick Anderson, the local kid, and not to mention that is a position where you can help on special teams. It was funny. I was watching some of Anthony Orji's tape when I saw how much they paid him and that he fills a need position. And I hear Deuce McAllister's voice, right on the. So we should ask Deuce what he thinks of him because he was calling his games. He also could wear number 0. He could be the first number 0 for the Saints. That's what he wore in college. There you go.
So 3 guys got $200,000. Orgy was one. Mark Evans, the offensive tackle from Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Shout
where
out Teron Armstead.
Yeah, Teron said he was a dog. I asked him. He said he's a good player. Shaq Davis also got $200,000, wide receiver from South Carolina. Only guy that got $200,000 last year, Rashid Shaheed. So that's usually a tell about how people feel about these guys coming in. It's not a guarantee they make the team. But starting out, those are the ones we should probably have our eyes on. Also like that they brought in a kicker and a punter. Will Lutz in the last year of his contract. Gillikin's in the last year of his contract. And I think Zach Woods also in the last year of his contract, the long snapper. So just having competition to prove, hey, do you guys stick around? They always bring them in, but I think it's a little bit more pressing this year just with those guys coming up on the end of their deals.
And we'll see what happens at linebacker and tight end. These aren't plug in and fix the issue, right? These 11 undrafted free agents.
Well, you covered Tulane. You tell us about Nick Anderson.
Well, Nick Anderson, and the thing that's is the reason why he fell out of the draft is because of his size. But when you watch his productivity, I mean, he looks like any other linebacker as far as what he's capable of doing. It's just going to be how does he size up and match up against NFL caliber athletes that have size on him. I want to see how he defends Alvin Kamara in space, how he tackles in space. That will be able to see if his size prevents him from doing his job well. And we'll get a good glimpse of it at training camp. So now it leads to where are the Saints at? What are the needs? And what's left to be done?
For me, it's tight end and linebacker. I think linebacker is a huge thing. And maybe some of these guys answer the question. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see, I think, starting today after 3 o'clock, they can sign veteran players. That won't count against the comp pick formula. That's been a big thing. New era in the Saints. They're preserving their draft picks going forward. I wouldn't be surprised to see some vets get signed this week.
We said defensive line was such a must for the team that if they somehow missed on the draft, they would have to sign June 1st free agent. I don't know if I feel the exact same way about linebacker. I really wanted them to get a young linebacker because they've got Pete Werner, Demario Davis starting. They need an eventual replacement for Demario Davis. I don't know that a 8th-year veteran linebacker would immediately have a role on this team, so I don't know that they have to go out and do that. And I was asking Dennis Allen about Zach Baugh, and I was kind of curious, does this say anything about your belief that maybe he can take that Caden Ellis next step? He didn't. He didn't actually give me confidence that the answer to that is yes. But he was like, that's what Zach's going to have to do. The opportunity is now there for him. But tight end is the position I would bet on most that we're going to see a veteran.
I just want like a
team.
Craig Robertson level player that can come in and play if Pete Werner gets hurt. Maybe it's DeMarco Jackson too. That's a guy that we've been not mentioning for months, and maybe he's already on the team. But I haven't seen it yet. And if you're telling me Pete gets hurt, that's like one thing where I'm like, man, that could be something that could really, really hurt the season.
No question.
And in Mike's defense, he asked Dennis Allen within that question about DeMarco Jackson. And
they haven't
really
seen it either. I mean, DeMarco Jackson's never really been on the field for this team. So, but they drafted him in the 5th round last year. So, the expectation should be just as high. Or was it 5th round last year? I think it was as any 5th round pick this year. So, he shouldn't be forgotten about.
And Zach Bond's not going anywhere because of his role on special teams. And Dennis Allen
I want to buy
to
Zach Bond. I want to buy Zach Bond stock. It's got to be free right now, right? Like
it's like the Wolf of Wall Street that the stocks they were selling in the strip mall.
Right. Well, this is not going to end our draft talk. We will have much more coming up in the next few weeks. We've got some pretty cool guests that are joining us this week that you're not going to want to miss out. Join Nick and Mike too on the website. They are going to be breaking down everything this week as far as the draft and rookie minicamp that's on the way. Any previews, guys? What to look out for?
We'll have our film reviews of all those guys coming up, breaking them all down one by one. And just so happy to have you here. It was a great podcast. Go check out PJ's too. Get a cup of coffee. Thanks. Shout out to them for supporting us and get your groceries at Ideal Market.
And look, sign up for the website. You can get us daily now. Everything in phase 3 is really exciting.
Phase 3, yeah.
Which includes new website. Thank you guys so much for joining us on NewOrleans.Football podcast. We'll see you next time.